Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's Wednesday, the 9th of September, 8 a.m. in the UK and 5 p.m. here in lockdown Melbourne, where I am. Welcome to Conversations with Thought Leaders, Series 2, Episode 1. For those that haven't tuned in before, Conversations with Thought Leaders is a platform connecting community with inspirational ideas and thinking from across the globe. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Advita Patel and Rebecca Murch. Good morning.
Morning, David.
Hi.
Hi there. So by way of a brief bio before we get into our conversation and presentation around rest, recover and revive. So Rebecca comes with a background in PR, moving through to internal communications and employee engagement with leading organisations up to board and executive level. In the past 5 years, she's been leading projects and initiatives in the NHS, focusing on employee engagement, change, organisational culture. And clearly the National Health Service have been frontline heroes in the battle for COVID, and communication has never been more critical. Rebecca's passionate about giving employees a voice to be the best versions of themselves. In terms of Advita's background, she's a chartered PR practitioner, helping people gain confidence and revolutionise the way they communicate in business. She's passionate about employee engagement, digital change, transformational communications. He's the founder of Comms Rebels, the co-founder of A Leader Like Me, and a board director for the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. So we're going to move through a presentation. So I'm going to hand over to you both shortly. A couple of final housekeeping things. There's a chat function at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to share your thoughts, your engagement, and then we can have a discussion around that. There's also a Q&A tab. So we'll be leaving plenty of time for questions towards the end. So please feel free to send questions. No need to wait to the end. Fire them through to speak with them. Over to you both.
Hello, everybody. Today, Rebecca and I are going to be talking about how to master your comms for your employees. So I'm going to share 3 pillars that I have worked and created based on various conversations I've had with communicators across various organisations and across the globe as well, but also with my role, as well as being a board director for the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. I'm also the chair of the Internal Communications Committee called CIPR Inside. So based on some conversations I've had with colleagues and peers, I created these 3 pillars, which I'm going to go through with you all today and hopefully share some insight around how you can communicate a little bit better with your employees and share some top tips and techniques, I hope. So the 3 pillars that I'm going to talk about is reset, recover, and revive. Now, the reason I set these 3 pillars is because lots of people were kind of moving very quickly into the recover phase without actually taking a step back. And I think when you're working at pace and you're working at speed, a lot of the times you want to kind of start moving into that communication phase, and you want to make sure that people are being communicated effectively and they're getting told what they need to be told. And that is really important. But one thing to recognize is without understanding the impact the pandemic has had on your business and your organization, you're going to be communicating quite conflicting messages in the organization. And bearing in mind, depending on the type of organization that you work in, there's lots of noise out there at the moment. So if you're social media, if you turn on the news, if you turn on read the papers, there's lots of advice, there's lots of conflicting advice, there's lots of information for people to absorb, to the extent that people are kind of switching off from a lot of information, and that does impact the way we communicate in our organisation as well. So one thing I advise, if you're not already a part of that decision-making table, is to have those courageous conversations with your colleague, with your leadership team, and with the individuals who make those decisions. So if you're part of that conversation already and you're part of that, you have that seat, then amazing. That will help you understand what's changing and what needs to be done differently. Because things will have changed. Things will, if you work in different organizations, different industries, some of you will have been hardly any impact, I would say, in terms of performance. So, depending on the industry that you're working in, some of you will have had a big impact in terms of adapting the way you're working, but you need to kind of understand where your business is moving. The other piece of advice in the reset pillar, I would say, is building your back to the workplace team. Now, your back to the workplace team is going to be a mix of your key departments and internal influencers. And I say that you should not really have your back to the workplace team being quite hierarchical. So I'm not saying it shouldn't really be all directors. You should definitely have decision makers to sign off things quickly. But your back to the workplace team should definitely be those key departments who understand the operation, who know what's happening with colleagues, who understand why you're doing what you're doing, and can answer and give you the temperature check quite quickly without you having to chase around and understand what's happening in the business. So having your back to the workplace team is critical when you're going through a bit of a change process. The next bit of advice I would share with you is to create your vision for the change linked to your values. So remember that, your values are going to remain pretty steady in the business and stuff, but your vision may adapt slightly, or your mission, depending on what your organization is. Like I said, this is going to be your key narrative. So make sure that your senior leaders and your line managers understand what the new narrative is and what your kind of next steps are. Because when you work in when you've got people working at home and you've got people working from the office, or you've got people working remotely or different hours, and line managers and leaders who are communicating with the workforce don't understand what the new narrative is and what the new story is, you're going to get mixed messages and very conflicting advice around the organisation. And people are going to make stuff up, right? And that's the reason I think gossip and things can happen, especially when you can't gather everybody as easily as you could do prior in a town hall. You can do it virtually, of course, but it's really important that your leadership team and your line managers understand what your story is, what the narrative is, and what they're meant to be communicating with those key messages. So having a master copy that you can share out with everybody. Once you've kind of nailed that and you know where your team and your organization is going, that's when you should really move into that recover phase. So this is when you need to communicate quite early and consistently and transparently with your employees. And the reason I say that is that people are very vulnerable at the moment. You read in the news that some people are losing their jobs, sadly. As David said at the beginning, redundancy is going to happen. There's going to be a bit of an economic crash, I think. I know, not even think. So your employees are going to be a little bit nervous, and they're going to be a little bit knowing that something's going to happen, but not quite sure what's going to happen. So you may see a dip in performance, you may see them being distracted, you may see people looking for other opportunities if they don't know what is happening in your business. So it's important to continue to build that trust. And doing that and making sure that your employees know what's happening, that's when you need to do those regular pulse checks. And I say regular pulse checks, I think the days where we used to do those annual surveys have passed. The change is so frequent now and the emotions are so different that you need to do these regular temperature checks. And this could just be a really simple 2 or 3 questions every month about how people are feeling, how they think the communications is going, what's the biggest worry that they've got, what's working well. And it'll just give you a sense of what's happening in that business quite quickly. With the pulse checks, it'll also help you understand what channels you're using. And what I mean by channels are things like your like newsletters or your town halls that you might be doing, or face-to-face meetings, so where you kind of communicate down to your employees or up to your employees as well. So remember the channels, not every channel that you may have brought in right at the beginning of the pandemic is useful now, I would say. So make sure you do an audit to see what people are reading and what they're not reading, and try and understand what's working for them. Because there is a habit sometimes in the world of comms that we can sometimes over-communicate too much, not us personally, but other people in our organisation as well. So just do a bit of a sense check about what people are saying and what they're not saying, and the pulse checks will help you understand where people are getting their information from as well. Once you've understood, you got that, you'll also find out from your pulse checks what kind of obstacles are in the way. So you may find that some leaders are not communicating as effectively as you think they may be, and not having those regular checks with their teams. Because, that one of the things we need to kind of understand is a lot of the stuff that we do is going to be communicated via our line manager population, because they've got a better relationship with those line managers, I would say. So your line managers are going to be very well versed in what's working for the team and what isn't working for the team. So make sure that you check in with your line managers and have those comms quite clear, so your line managers know where to go to get information. It's quite clear where the information is stored. They've also got a safe space where they can ask questions without the fear of judgment. They can be a little bit vulnerable as well. And the third pillar, which some people, when you're working at pace, like I said, you can forget about the revive section element of what you're trying to achieve. And the reason I say revive is really important, like I said to you before, there's a lot going on. There's lots of noise, there's lots of information. People have had to contend with lots of rules and regulations, children staying at home, parents need to be looked after, illness, sadly, some people have had to go through as well, COVID-19. It's really important that we acknowledge this and we also look at sharing some good news, because we can do that. There will be some stuff that's happening in your business, such as sharing short-term wins, recognizing some of the people who've been really supportive of delivering some of the key messages and some of the key work that you're doing and keeping the work going at the same time. Because recognition, they may get their thanks and the well dones and from their line managers, which is brilliant, but having that little bit of recognition from a senior leader can go a long way. So I've encouraged a lot of my clients to handwrite letters to homes or to postcards, and if they didn't want to send, if they didn't want to send it through the post, which is fair enough, because people don't want to post things out, then take a picture of a handwritten note and email it to people. That's a lot more effective than typing something out, because you're taking the effort to step away from your PC and write something out by hand. And that's a really easy, kind of very, very tactical way of to get that recognition out there. But people, I can guarantee, will appreciate that much more than a £10 voucher, to be honest. So think about the people who are doing some good work, and it will also help to encourage innovation, because things have changed, and those individuals who work on the operational floor are the ones who know best, I would say, about what the business is and what your customers want. So make sure you tap into those individuals and encourage them to have open, honest kind of conversations, and your communications in the recover phase should hopefully help them understand that. Keep monitoring that engagement. I'm a big fan of data and measurement. Your gut feeling is really important, but backing that up with evidence and data is I would say equally important, to give you that foundation about how things are actually going, so you can plot and monitor before it goes a bit too farther down the line. Also, keep checking in with your back to the workplace team. They're there for a reason, so sense check with them, give them pick up the phone and just have a quick chat about how certain messages may have been received in the organisation, what people are saying about them, how people are feeling. So you can feed that right back up to the senior C-suite colleagues, so they understand what's being said and what isn't being said. And lessons learned. We often forget that, what did we learn? Where did we fail? Where did it work really well? Keep a track of all the kind of big lessons and even the little lessons, in fact. And I normally just have a little spreadsheet and kind of type in what I've kind of learned from that moment and what the kind of results were and what I would have done better. And it just keeps track. So when you do the evaluation after every few months, it'll just give you a sense of where you need to kind of improve and your learning areas and where you're kind of doing really good work. And keep sharing those good news stories and success stories. And what I mean by that is this, your employees are guaranteeing, if you're not already doing this, then I would definitely get them to share some of the good stuff that they're doing in their community and the work that they're doing with their colleagues, because that is really, it's quite motivational, right? And people are doing some really good work out there, and we can often forget when we're in the kind of the weeds of what we need to do, and encouraging colleagues to share those news stories. So the Culber-Ross model, if you want to Google it, you'll see it's a change curve, and it was initially developed as a grief model, and it was developed to help people understand how to manage grief. And I would say what we are going through at the moment in this pandemic is a type of grief. And we've lost a lot of the ways we used to work, and we've had to adapt the way we're working. So the model was initially created, like I said, to help people understand where they are on that change curve. Because one thing to understand is that people don't move at the same pace. So I put my pillars over the change curve. So you've got the the initial phase, which is shock, denial, and anger. And people go up and down this change curve like a roller coaster, by the way. So you'll have people who are kind of like, yeah, I get it. I know what's going on. I'm okay. I'm now a part of this. I'm accepting it. I'm going to be part of this future. I'm going to start solving. And then as soon as a change has happened, they quite quickly move into that depression phase, or feeling a bit low and thinking, what's the point? And they'll maybe back up again, and then they might go into denial. I get my senior leaders and line managers to take this into team meetings and get people to plot where they are on this change curve. And it just gives them a sense of where their teams are and what's happening in their teams. There's various versions available online. Some people, there's another step that's been added in now, so you might want to check that out. But it's a really good tool to help you understand the morale and energy and performance as well of what's happening in your business. So highly recommend that you check out the change curve and use it as a tool and a bit of a framework to help your leaders. And it's a good conversation starter as well. So I'm going to hand over to Rebecca, who's just going to explain how this model works in real life.
Thanks, Advita.
Sorry, Rebecca, you carry on while I mess around with screen share. Sorry.
Okay, a quick intro while screen sharing. But what I'm going to cover now just quickly is some of the basically our case study from what we've been doing in the CCG, which is the part of the NHS that I work in. The elements for success for us were really based around taking that listening approach that Advita's touched on already. And so we introduced at the early stages, it was a weekly pulse check to really understand how staff were feeling. So were they connected? Where were they getting their information from? And were we supporting them? And it's recognizing that working from home, a lot of organizations might have a working from home policy. You might have a flexible working policy, but nobody does it on a permanent basis. And they didn't apply for the job potentially on that basis. So it was also recognizing that staff were all facing personal challenges as well, which were really going to impact on their ability to deliver their job. So how could we support them through it? And one of the elements for success for us as an organisation was really focusing on the wellbeing aspect and introducing a full wellbeing programme to support staff. And we were able to, we had a live strategy document where we were running our temperature check, and then we were responding. So in real time, putting in place things that staff said that they needed. And it's developed into, we've put on a huge amount of activities and support, but it's further than in terms of well-being. It's more than fruit and yoga, but it is about how you enable people to bring their whole self to work, recognizing that people have children at home, they might need to work flexible different hours. And we really, through listening to them, were able to see, and I'll show you in a bit, that we were actually able to measure the success of that. The other core elements that we really need to consider if you're looking at what sort of model of working you might be implementing going forward. So a lot of organisations, we know it won't be potentially office-based. You'll be looking at a hybrid between home and office working, and how you use office space in the future. It's really important. We developed what call a single source of truth. So one area where staff at any point could go to and find out the latest messaging and the latest guidance that they needed. So whether that was how they accessed the office or any risk assessments they needed to go through. Our frequently asked questions were all held there. We put that on our intranet. And it was so that because you're home working, people don't have that ability to just go up and check something with somebody. And people will be feeling a lot of anxiety. So it's making sure that people can find the information quickly and that it is up to date. And that can really provide reassurance for staff as well, particularly because a lot of people are finding an over use of sort of Teams meetings, feeling a bit Teams out, and actually any kind of conversation now that you used to maybe have walking through the office or quickly checking something with a colleague becomes a meeting, because you have to call them, and then it takes 15, 20 minutes. And actually that in itself can be really draining. The other sort of 2 points are quite closely linked, but single sign-off goes back to where Advita was talking about a back to the workplace team. within the CCG, we set up an operational working group that basically was our business critical response centre. So anything linked to keeping the CCG operational. And it was great. So comms were there, internal comms had a seat at that table. And it was making sure that you have, so, if you're working in comms, having a single sign-off process, so a designated executive who has responsibility to make sure that those communications get signed off really quickly. And if you're a senior manager, it's really important that you really champion or get endorsement for that, because otherwise, if communications aren't getting out quickly, staff will quickly disconnect, they'll fill the void. And it's really important to make sure your communications are really clear, because people are sat in their home environments potentially, and they're making up the rest of the story. So if you aren't able to answer questions quickly, it can lead to that sort of ambiguity. And that's why having that single source of sign-off can really speed things up. And alongside considering how you keep your leaders visible. So whereas before you would see them obviously walking around the office, how do you make sure that your leadership team have a voice? And for us in particular, we've really seen a change in people's perceptions of our leaders, and they've become a lot more human through this. And there is a huge opportunity to do that. But how do you make sure that people are still hearing from your chief executive and your leadership team and seeing them? So whether that is a weekly briefing, whether it's Q&A sessions, but that they are fronting that and that people can see them. Fantastic.
We've got some questions coming in, and I've got a few things. Really interesting presentation. Thank you for sharing that. We'll go through a few questions. Firstly, Rebecca, I'd like to just touch on you speaking about leadership visibility. And I was listening to a really interesting podcast with Reid Hoffman, Masters of Scale. I recommend it. And he was interviewing Angela Ahrendts, who was the Burberry CEO and then the Apple retail CEO. Really super impressive lady. He was talking about her comms and just getting messages out there. She used to do video comms. Quick 2 minutes on the iPhone, send it out to everyone. And I've noticed a lot more video content coming through in the virtual world. So maybe you could sort of give us a view around your views of more video content in comms rather than the traditional send an email and people may or may not read it.
Yeah, so I definitely think there's a case of a lot of people think, well, no, I communicated it because they sent an email, and people don't factor in, did anyone read it? But in terms of video is a much more engaging way to get a message across. You can also do it in a much shorter, snappier way that doesn't take up a lot of time. But one of the comments we actually got back from staff, so we do a weekly chief exec briefing that we took online. It's like hosting an all-staff event every week. We've got it later on today. It can be quite stressful. It's hosted by our chief exec. And actually we recorded that as well, during the pandemic as an audio file. And actually, a lot of people were saying how valuable it was because they're reading so much, because people are always on the screen. So in terms of actually producing content in different ways, recognizing, so we actually introduced a podcast as well, a wellbeing podcast, because people can listen to it on the go. And we've seen a huge drop. I've seen it myself personally in terms of people becoming really sedentary, working slightly longer hours as well, because you're absorbing your commute. That we need to be thinking about ways where staff can get messages, but where we're not fixing them to just reading reams of content because it doesn't go in. But how can we get sort of key messages across and delivered in the style of the leader themselves?
Yeah, I think technology's had a good pandemic, basically, hasn't it? More companies look into digital content and how they can change the way they do business. And just finally on the NHS, how's morale there? Because, I mean, they've been, frontline heroes, and there must be a huge amount of pressure on the NHS. I know it's a vast organisation, but how are people coping with it all?
I was going to say, I can't speak for everybody in the NHS, but there's, in a way, in terms of there's been so much love for the NHS, and I think that's really, really carried people through. So one of the things
on a Thursday night, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that we did in our area was we did a reverse clap. So we got all of the healthcare staff to clap for the public to say thank you for your support and for following the government guidance. But there was a real feeling, I think, of just people really being part of something. And I think that has really, a crisis can really help focus everybody. And that's also, in some ways, made things a lot easier because everyone is working towards that one goal. And that's, I think, some of the really big learnings that have come out of this. Because obviously in your day-to-day, and in some ways I think what we're going into is probably the harder bit. When you go back to businesses as usual, when you've got lots of competing priorities and there's lots of important things going on, it's harder sometimes than what we've just come through is a whole organisation coming together and really focused on one core vision and goal and working towards the same objective. But there's definitely a feeling of say camaraderie and good feeling in terms of being part of that response.
I think you've really seen organisations and people's true colours in a crisis, haven't you? I think Warren Buffett famously said, when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. And, it's really sort of see people, the spirit and the fortitude coming through. So I just want to touch, Advita, if we might now, on you spoke about town halls, blank canvases, and a few people have been asking me, where we'll be in 12 months' time, what it will look like. And I sort of said, well, basically, I think we need to take the best bits of the old ways of working and the best bits of the last 6 months, merge them together and use it as a blank canvas to, obviously, your business is going to be your business if you're an insurer or a telco. There's only so far you can change that. But in terms of the way you work, there's an opportunity to really reimagine it and get everyone's engagement and buy-in. I was wondering if you could speak to that a bit, because you were speaking a bit about that.
Yeah, totally. I think, this is a great opportunity. And I think we need to start looking on the positives a little bit, because it's really easy to kind of get so drained on all the negative that's, and it is just a terrible time for so many people. But in order to kind of look towards the positives and see what worked really well, like you said, David, what worked really well last time and what can we do to improve things working better. So I know, some people are doing some amazing things online, like virtual socials. I saw one team that I work with did a treasure hunt, like a mystery thing where they had shared clues and people following around with their phones, and just to kind of make some, do some interesting things, but also in terms of virtual town halls and looking at, because you can, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in the UK, you can gather as social distance. It might change, but just keep an eye on what the kind of rules and guidelines are telling you and mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got a few other questions coming through. So we'll just try and knock over a few of those. So Rebecca, maybe you can handle the first one. So this is an anonymous question. And the question is, from your perspective, should the regular sense checks be anonymous or should it be a survey with names?
So I would say anonymous, and we have kept ours completely anonymous because there's an element of building trust. We do have free text boxes where people could, and sometimes people leave without maybe realizing that you might be able to identify where somebody, in what department maybe somebody works. But one of the things that we've seen is by number one, obviously, then people being able to freely talk, because they might want to say something that isn't particularly positive, and you need them to be able to share that feeling and know that that's not going to then potentially be used against them, because that's what the nervousness always is, I think, from people being able to freely share their opinions. And I think over time, as people have seen that we've responded to that, positive and negative, to try and make change happen, you build more confidence in people being able to share when things aren't working, because that's what you really want to get down and under the skin of, is what isn't working and how can we fix these problems. And we've seen the response rate grow over time. So I would absolutely advocate keeping it anonymous. But if you did want to, you could ask people to leave their names if they wanted to. But I don't know how much value it would really add.
Fantastic. I'll throw this one to you, Advita, if we may. Jamie Newman asks, good evening, Jamie. How often do you do the pulse checks with the team? Was it weekly? What platform did you use to gather the information? In fact, this looks more perhaps centric to the NHS as well. So maybe you can both answer this one with your relevant experiences. Was it just a standard poll like SurveyMonkey, etc.? And do you do any room team style temperature checks to see how various teams were coping? So maybe Rebecca first, and then Advita, you can chip in with a sentence.
So in terms of our sort of the regular temperature checks we were doing, we just used SurveyMonkey. I'm quite lucky in our team, we actually have an insights and engagement team. So to really help sort of hone the questions and make sure that we were asking questions that weren't leading in any way and that we could build on what we'd done week on week. But it was just a SurveyMonkey account that we used. We did also do at our weekly gathering, the chief exec briefing that we did some live pulse surveys, so similar to the Zoom surveys that we did, to just get a broad kind of temperature check of how are you feeling. And it was a bit more, I would say, so it was making that meeting more interactive, but it was just more of a sense check of in the moment, how are you feeling? And that was, you could use any sort of online pulse, people using their phones to sort of answer the poll questions.
Fantastic. Advita, can you give us a few words around pulse checks with the team? What you've seen work?
Yeah, I think you need to. It depends on the appetite of your team. I think trial it out. I would say monthly if you want. I know people do one question a day in some organisations on the intranet where they just do a little pulse, one question and that's it. You can use things like Mentimeter as well, which is a really good tool to do if you don't want access to SurveyMonkey. There's also Google Sheets is a good way of getting questions in. But I would say on a monthly basis, depending on how frequent the change are, you can also do it fortnightly, but don't be asking hundreds of questions. I would try and keep it to around about 4 or 5 if you're doing it monthly, if it's that frequent. If you're doing it quarterly, then maybe push it up to 8 or 10, but don't ask too many questions. And just before we move on, just big thing about when you're asking questions is make sure you do something with them. Don't just keep asking questions and getting the answers and then not doing anything with it, because you will just turn people off.
Absolutely. I think we're out of time. And actually, just on the handwritten note and the face mask, my amazing colleague, Brianne, we commissioned some face masks for our team, and she sent everyone in the team a face mask along with a handwritten note. And I have to say, it's such a genuinely authentic thing that she did. It was brilliant. We really, really appreciated it. And I think, the handwritten note, it's so unusual to get a letter these days. So I really particularly enjoyed that point. We're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for taking part today. Enjoy the rest of your days. Ladies and gentlemen, Advita and Rebecca.